Chapter 696 Comment Cut. Whammy. In the final moments before everyone left for Melandoir, the smile on Kevin's face slowly receded as he watched Jin's back slowly merge and enter the portal. After Jin's figure disappeared, the portal gradually began to contract, and an eerie stillness began to spread throughout the space that Kevin was occupying at the time. He did not move from his spot and maintained his gaze on the same spot where the portal had previously stood. His eyes gradually closed and the mana around him froze completely. After what seemed like an interminable amount of time, Kevin finally opened his mouth and mumbled something. "This is for the best. It looks like things are working in my favor." Licking his lips, Kevin opened his eyes and turned around. Without so much as to say another word, he quietly left the room. Plank. Melandoir Hogue's Object Galaxy. Crunch it. As soon as I stepped into Melandoir, the very first thing that I was able to hear was the gentle crunching sound that was made by my foot as it pressed against the dirt beneath my feet. My entire body had a heaviness to it that suggested the gravity of this world was significantly stronger than that of Earth. But it wasn't really anything that hampered my ability to move about freely. Perhaps it was because I had reached a point in my life where even 10 times the normal gravity of the Earth didn't seem to have much of an effect on me, or because of something else entirely, but I felt no sense of real discomfort, which was all that mattered. My hearing, smell, and taste gradually started to come back, and when I opened my eyes, I was greeted by the sight of a vast land that was covered by a red sky. It seemed as though the grass in this location was even greener than in some of the Earth's most scenic locations, and the large towering trees were spread out across the landscape in such a way that they filled every available space in my field of vision. Quite different from what I imagined. In the beginning, I had anticipated coming across a location that was more analogous to the demon world which I had once visited, but instead of receiving a world that was comparable to that one, I was shown a world that was absolutely breathtaking. Was it possibly due to the fact that this location was formerly the primary world in which the elves lived? I wasn't sure. I was about to turn around to look at the others when all of a sudden both of my feet came to a stop and I closed both of my eyes. Within a split second I felt every pore of my body open up, and just like when I arrived back on Earth from Amora, the demonic energy that was present in the air quickly rushed toward me, sending me into a wave of extreme ecstasy. As the demonic blood that was contained within my system started to move in a more fluid manner, I felt every single pore of my body start to relax. I let out a long and relaxed breath, feeling oddly refreshed. Hef. I was startled out of my reverie by a loud, throaty sound, and when I turned around I was shocked to see Amanda, Jean, and Melissa staring at me with pale looks while holding onto their throats with one hand while opening and closing their mouths repeatedly. Almost like a fish that was out of the water, desperately trying to take in oxygen. "It looks like the demonic energy is too dense for you guys." With a single glance, I discovered the source of the problem. It was the fact that the air was devoid of any mana and only contained demonic energy. Unlike the demonic world, which actually had a bit of mana, albeit almost non-existent, this place shockingly had a single trace of mana, as the demonic energy here was many times thicker than that of the demonic world, which resulted in the suffocating sensation that the others were feeling. It was also important to note that there was almost no mana in the atmosphere of Amora. However, in contrast to demonic energy, aura was not as corrosive, which was why the others were able to remain on the planet without experiencing any difficulties. But now that I wasn't in Amora, I was presented with a new issue. One that I, fortunately, had the solution to. I didn't think I would have to do this, but it seems like we have no choice. With a complicated look on my face, I extended my hand, where 3 contracts appeared, and I handed them to the others. "Here, sign this. If you sign it, you won't have any problem with the demonic energy that is in the air." Despair-stricken, the others snatched the contracts from my hands and unfolded them carefully. I didn't move from where I was standing. I just kept staring at their faces as they went through a remarkable transformation right in front of my very eyes. I spoke before they could say anything else. "Just sign it. It's a complicated story, but let's just say that I have demonic blood running in my body and can now make demon contracts." Raising my hand, I pointed at the contracts and continued. "If you read the contracts, the time that it will be in effect will be 1 month, Earthen time. You don't have to worry about it being permanent. You could have definitely told us this before coming here." Melissa gave me a death glare with her eyes, which gave the impression that she was planning to devour me alive. I shrugged my shoulders. Just sign it. I wasn't aware that the demonic energy here would be so thick that there would not be a single shred of mana here. I'm not omnipotent. I don't know everything. After a brief pause, during which I fixed my eyes on Melissa, I lowered my head and mumbled in a tone that was barely audible for anyone to hear. Trust me, if not for the situation calling for it, I definitely wouldn't give you the contract. Although you've calmed down a lot over the recent years, I can already imagine just how moody you will be once you sign the contract. Hot water is definitely not going to be enough. PFE. My head snapped in the direction of the muffled laugh, and as I did so, I noticed Jean quickly turn his head away. My eyes squinted. He definitely heard what I said. Who else but the assassin with the specialized hearing sense? Fine. Fortunately, Melissa did not hear, and after giving me one last dirty look, she signed the contract. Jean and Amanda followed her example shortly after. Immediately after they gave their approval of the contract, the document visibly shook for a split second before disappearing from their hands, and I felt 3 links being formed inside of my body at the same time. After that, the demonic energy that was in the air started to slowly enter their bodies, and everyone's facial expression changed to one of displeasure. I quickly reassured. Stick with it. It won't hurt for much longer. Just bear with it for now. It should pass within the next hour or so. Easier said than done. It feels as though I'm being licked all over by a dog. I cocked my head in response to Melissa's mumbled complaint. Did you actually get that impression? My recollection of that was quite a bit different from what she was describing. Who cares? I shrugged my shoulders and sat down cross-legged on the ground. Following my example, the others did the same, and I closed my eyes and started to beckon the demonic energy in the air to move in my direction. Gradually, the space around us became extremely quiet. 2 hours later. Done. The gentle sound of Melissa's voice snapped me out of my meditative state just as quickly as I had entered it. When I finally opened my eyes, I saw that she wasn't the only one who was finished. Amanda and Jean had also finished what they were doing as well. At first glance, they appeared to be the same as they had been in the past. However, if one were to pay close attention, one would notice that the demonic energy in the air was gradually moving toward their bodies. It was a clear indication that the contract signing was successful. It looks like everyone is done. I similarly stood up and patted my clothes clean. Then, tapping on my bracelet, I took out a large map and opened it. Is that the map of this planet? Amanda spoke to me while she was standing next to me, having sneaked her way over to where I was standing without my noticing. Looking at her, I nodded my head. Yeah, Kevin gave it to me before coming here. Has he already been here before? Beats me. I shrugged my shoulders and feigned ignorance. I wasn't exactly able to share with her the information that Kevin possessed a system that included an inbuilt map of every single planet in the universe. Oh, I see. Amanda didn't seem too disappointed with my answer, as she just merely looked at the map with me. It wasn't long before I heard Jin's voice echo beside me. Since you have the map, where are we going? Cut. I replied slowly, turning my head to look at him. The capital city of this planet and the city where the world tree resides. Chapter 697 Cut. Within the confines of Melindwar lies a city that resides next to the world tree. It was once a prosperous and magnificent city that belonged to the elves. Some even contend that it was the most powerful planet within the Hogue galaxy, located approximately 600 million light-years from the Milky Way galaxy. The city was primarily known for being next to the world tree, a colossal tree that bore special fruits every year and granted the elves unrivaled sensitivity to the mana in the air. Astra Year 1T08. On this date, the planet that was once hailed as the most powerful planet in Hogue's galaxy was conquered, and the world tree became corrupted, bearing fruits of something known as the Devil Fruit, a fruit that granted demons the magical property of purifying their bloodlines and the ability to surpass their natural bloodline limit. From then on, demons became an unstoppable force in the universe, and galaxies trembled at the mere mention of their names. The journey toward Cut was fairly unobstructed, and rightfully so. Aside from the fact that we were humans, there was nothing else that particularly stood out about us, with the possible exception of our ranks. In spite of this, the fact that we were all now capable of absorbing demonic energy was sufficient to prevent the nearby forces from becoming interested in us. Not that they would pay any attention to us to begin with. Given that we had a map that was only partially detailed, Navigating around such locations proved to be as easy as breathing, and other than the fact that it increased the amount of time it took for us to reach Cut, there was absolutely nothing that could be faulted about the situation. 2 days after arriving on the planet. We're near. After coming to a complete stop and clearing the area in front of me of any vegetation, I reached into my dimensional space and extracted a few black hoods, which I then passed out to the others. Wear this for now. Although it is highly likely that we're not the only humans on this planet, granted that there probably used to exist a planet similar to Earth in this galaxy, it is still best if we wear this to hide our faces. You might never know what happens. In this world, one could find more than just demons. It was widely known that this planet was one of the most significant in the known galaxy, and there are likely to be a great number of contractees living on the planet. As a result, it wouldn't be all that surprising if the four of us were able to move freely about the city without being bothered by anyone. However, I knew that it was best to remain on the side of caution. I knew too little about this planet to take any risks. Make sure that your face is covered enough that people don't see it. We wouldn't want trouble coming our way the moment we step into the city. All right. Melissa snatched the robe from my hands, annoyance evident on her face. Sadly, it seemed as though the effect of the contract was taking place, and Melissa was returning to her old self. I couldn't say I was very pleased. Give it here. Jean and Amanda were also not excluded from the effects of the contract. Jin's words became cruder and Amanda became even quieter. With a sigh, I also put on the hood. This trip is going to be longer than I expected. As soon as I was certain that it covered every part of my face, I turned around to check on the others to ensure that they too were wearing the robe. Let's get going. After confirming that they were prepared, I pulled down the hood a little further and headed in the direction of the city marked on the map. We only had to travel a short distance to reach our destination, about 2 kilometers, and by the time the thicket of trees began to thin out, we could already make out the silhouette of a sizable city in the distance. We all came to a stop the moment that the city became visible for everyone to see. This is not what I expected. What sort of design is that? It looks like we've gone back in time. Like Jean stated. As soon as I was able to make out the silhouette of the city in the distance, I had the unmistakable impression that we had traveled through time. If one were to try to describe the appearance of the city, one might say that it had more of a medieval feel to it, despite the fact that there were no massive walls surrounding the entire city. Are those carriages? They are. Because of Melissa's mutterings, I turned my attention to the large path that led toward the city, and I noticed that there were indeed carriages heading toward the enormous city in the distance. Of course, they weren't carried by horses because the monsters that carried them were much scarier and larger than horses could ever be. But it was still strange to see carriages moving about on the pathways. If that had already impressed me when I turned to look at the city in the distance, I was left even more bewildered. Richly hued walls, colors, and engravings adorned the walls, arches, and pillars of many buildings, lending them a medieval appearance. I could see from a distance that some of the doors' arches were carved with zigzags and adorned with animal faces, while the pillars' heads were carved with scalloped curves. Those were the smaller structures, while the larger structures were constructed as cathedrals with steeply pitched roofs or dome-shaped roofs. What do we do? Should we go in? Yeah. I nodded my head at Amanda's words, snapping out of my short-lived reverie. Let's go in for now. We will have all the time we want to admire the city. For now, let's go in and familiarize ourselves with the place. What was important at the moment was to gain as much information as possible by roaming the city. Everything else came later. Let's go. Making sure that my hoodie was lowered all the way, I headed for the main path that led to the city in the distance. The others followed me from behind. Alliance Headquarters, Earth. How should we proceed from this moment forth? Octavius asked, standing in front of Kevin's desk with an expressionless look on his face. His eyes were currently looking down on Kevin, who was quietly sitting on his desk, pen in hand and scribbling through a series of documents. Silence filtered through the room after Octavius's question, and at the exact moment that Octavius's brows started to furrow, Kevin set the pen down and looked up. This is our next course of action. He slid one of the papers across the table. Extending his hand, Octavius picked up the paper and slowly read through it. Upon reading the document, his expression slid into a serious one, and he cast a sidelong glance in Kevin's direction. How accurate is this information? Fairly accurate. Kevin reassured, reclining on his chair, his expression calm. Those are the locations in which the mana compressors are located. Please inform the members of the Alliance to gear up and get ready to fight. What should the grade of those that will be deployed be? Octavius asked, setting the paper down, his face grim. For now, a couple of S rankers per team will do. There are a total of 8 mana compressors, so a specialized team with multiple S rankers will do. I understand. Octavius gradually nodded his head, not refusing Kevin's order. I'll quickly inform the others of your decision. Thank you. No longer leaning against his chair, Kevin interlocked his hands in front of him and rested his chin on top. His expression never once changed throughout the whole time, which was somewhat unsettling for Octavius, who decided to take this opportunity to excuse himself and leave. If there is nothing else that you need me for, I will go and seclude myself. Finally about to reach SSS-rank? Not quite, but with your help I should be able to reach it in less than 3 months. That's good to hear. Kevin smiled happily, his eyes sliding into thin crescents, further unsettling Octavius, who had now reached for the door of the room. Okay then, I will now take my leave. If you need anything from me, just tell one of my assistants. I will try my best to do whatever is assigned to me. Alliance leader. All right then. Kevin stood up and gave Octavius a slight wave of his hand as he was leaving the room. Octavius acknowledged Kevin's gesture and then opened the door. Clank. When the sound of the door closing faded, so did the smile on Kevin's face. He was currently exhibiting a demeanor that was far different than a couple of minutes ago, almost as if he were a completely different person. Lowering his head to glance at the stack of papers before him, Kevin set the one that he had given to Octavius aside and took out another one and gently placed it in front of him. To Kevin. From Rin. The location of the mana compressors is as indicated in the map that I sent you. There is no need to doubt the accuracy of the information since I had Ava directly use her skill to find their location. If you want to get rid of them or have an idea of where they are, you know where to look. However, after thinking about it for a bit, I would advise against sending anyone to the locations. Although I'm unsure, I have a feeling that it might just be a trap. It is unlikely since the extent of Ava's ability is not known, and putting the 2 and 2 together is hard, but I do think that it's something that should be taken into consideration. In fact, if this is really a trap, then it is highly likely that they have set up multiple executives in each station, which would actually bring rise to a great opportunity that you can exploit by directly attacking the monolith headquarters, which would be more exposed than usual. In any case, the decision is up to you. I wish you the best of luck. Chapter 698 Quest 1. The pungent odor of alcohol lingered in the air, permeating every corner of the small tavern filled with demons who were seated at round wooden tables and drinking what appeared to be potent alcoholic beverages. Their eye nothing better than some sweet alcohol aft, some heavy work. Ye bet. Demons weren't the only creatures that resided in the tavern, as dwarves, or more accurately, Dugars sat around the round tables, chatting and singing loudly. In one of the tables near the far ends of the tavern. What have you guys found out? I asked, looking at the others in front of me. As soon as we arrived in the city, the very first thing that we did was break up into smaller groups in order to investigate the situation independently. Information was key in order for us to better adapt ourselves to this foreign world. Following our initial parting, we don't go more than a couple of hours before we find ourselves back at the same tavern where we'd agreed to meet. Right now we were now sharing our findings. Should I start first? Jean was the first one to speak, crossing his legs and leaning back on his chair. Though his face was covered by the hood, I could more or less guess that he was currently frowning. I'm sure the majority of you already know this, but from what I've gathered, the city is governed by 4 major superpowers. According to what I've learned, they are referred to as the 7 royal houses, and each is led by a prince/princess ranked demon. Each royal house represents a different clan such as envy, sloth, lust, and so on. Jean halted, then brought his hand up to his mouth and began massaging what appeared to be his chin. I couldn't learn too much given that this is sensitive information, but, from the looks of it, there is an obvious power struggle between each royal house. Nothing needs to be said about why they're fighting, as most of you are probably aware of why, right? Yeah. I nodded my head. The answer to that question was kind of obvious. The houses were engaged in a fierce competition for their share of the devil fruits that were harvested from the world tree. Each year, the world tree would distribute a limited quantity of its fruits, each of which contained varying degrees of purity, with the purer ones being the most limited. Due to the fact that they were restricted, they were considered scarce resources, which was ultimately what led to the emergence of the conflicts. All of the houses were fighting for the opportunity to have more devil fruits. After all, devil fruits mean more power. Each year, the 7 houses will compete with each other in order to determine who gets the best harvest. The event seems to be called the World's Decree, and it is where all major powers within the planet compete for the chance of increasing their shares over the demonic fruits. Jean continued, crossing his arms together. From what I know, for the past 3 years, the Royal House of Envy has been the house that monopolized the fruits, bearing the grudge of the other houses. From the looks of it, their monopoly will not last much longer, with this year probably being the most brutal of all the showdowns. The fact that there were 7 houses in Reincarnated was not a coincidence. It was something that Jezebeth had ordered a while back. Even though I didn't know exactly what he was thinking, it was obvious that he didn't want one house to have a complete monopoly over the fruits of the world tree. It was highly likely that he was attempting to stimulate competition, and of course, with 7 houses that were roughly equivalent in power, a monopoly of resources couldn't exactly exist because the other 6 houses could decide to collaborate in order to prevent the house with the most power from emerging victorious. That's about it. This is what I found out in the past 2 hours that I was roaming the city. My turn now. Melissa spoke, her voice unusually grumpy. Since he's already talked about the main powers, I'll just share the other stuff that I learned. Rummaging through her pockets, she tossed 3 coins on the table and spoke. There weren't many, with what seemed to be about 5 in a mix of bronze and silver. In the city, the main currency known as the Zeres, which isn't too difficult to understand. Take a look at the coins. Melissa pointed at the coins she threw on the table. Before I could say anything, Melissa snapped. No, I didn't steal them. I just sold a couple of things that I collected on our way here. Even though I couldn't see what she was doing, I could tell that she was probably rolling her eyes behind the hood, and I quickly clamped my mouth shut in response. As expected, demonic energy and Melissa are a bad combination. The Zeres are divided into 4 coins. Zur, Rum, Mor and Jor. Melissa tapped each coin with her finger. As you can see, each is different in size and so is their value. Although the names are complicated and it seems like the system is complicated, it really isn't. The Zur is about. Melissa tilted her head a little, thinking for a moment before blurting. Tenyu? I think it's more or less that. Her voice was a little uncertain at first, but the confusion didn't last for long as she continued. The coin isn't really that hard to remember since it's just a bronze coin, while the Rum is silver and worth about 1,000 U. And the Mor is worth about 100,000 U, with the coin being gold in color. Lastly, there is the Jor, which is worth about 1,000,000 U and has a platinum color? I haven't really checked. But apparently the names of the coins are in some sort of Elven dialect, with Zur meaning bronze. Not sure about the rest, but I wouldn't be surprised if they meant silver, gold and platinum. 1,000,000 U coin. I mumbled under my breath, finding the concept rather strange. It seemed rather peculiar to me that demons were still employing the use of coins, especially when one considers the fact that on Earth, coins have all but vanished from circulation due to the widespread adoption of credit and debit cards in recent decades. Drumming my fingers, which were covered by a black glove in order to hide my human hands over the table, I fell into thought for a moment. To summarize everything, the currency of this place was known as the Zeres, and it consisted of 4 coins: the Zur, Rum, Mor and Jor. Zur 10 U. Rum 1,000 U. Mor 100,000 U. Jor 1,000,000 U. Raising my head, I looked at Melissa. Just how much money have you managed to collect so far? Not much. Melissa responded while searching through her pockets and tossing a couple of additional coins into the air. All of which were bronze. About 10 Zur and 2 Rum. So that would be about 2,100 U? Yeah. Melissa yawned and leaned back while mumbling something. It's just about enough to cover our living expenses for a week. I see. Indeed, the money would definitely help us cover the fees for where we would sleep for just about a week. However, it was, of course, in one of the poorer districts. Slowly, I turned to look at Amanda. What about you? What did you find out? Every month, there's an important auction in the city. Apparently, they sell a lot of good items there, some of which might even be useful to you. However, the price for each item starts with at least 5 Jor. I scratched the lower end of my jaw and mumbled. I did hear about that, and although I would love to attend, we're currently low on funds, which would basically make it impossible for us to attend, at least for now. Rummaging through my pocket, I took out a leaflet and placed it on the table. Mass event quest. Quest assigner. Duchess Pertinol. Reward. The reward will depend on the contribution, with at least 5 more guaranteed for each participant. Minimum requirement. Marquee rank. Description. Request to aid Duchess Pertinol in taming the abyssal mammoth, a Duke-ranked monster. The minimum rank required to participate is Marquee, and the quest takes place on the 300th planetary revolution. The task entails assisting Duchess Pertinol in bringing down and taming the abyssal mammoth, whose approximate strength is close to that of a prince. The rewards will be determined by the contributions made throughout the quest. If the Duchess is pleased with the performance, several jor could be rewarded. Passing the leaflets to the others, I softly said, "This will be the best opportunity for us to gain a proper foothold in this city, as well as gain some money for the auction." I paused and lowered my voice. Who knows, maybe, just maybe, we might even be able to put on a performance that may gain the interest of this so-called Duke. From what I understood about the quest, this one was going to involve a lot of people, with many signing up to get the chance to show off their skills to Duchess Pertinol, one of the higher-ranked demons within the city, who resided in one of the royal houses. From what I've gathered, this Duke Pertinol is someone that belongs to the House of Sloth. I wasn't able to gather much, but from what I know, she seems to be the daughter of the Sloth House, and having just broken through to Duke rank, she seems to want to tame the abyssal mammoth, which, from what I've gathered, seemed to be a large elephant-like creature that is as big as one of the buildings in the city. The request itself wasn't actually hard. If push comes to shove, I could probably do it by myself. However, given the state that I was in, I knew that I would be put in a precarious situation if I decided to fight against the creature, as the seals would break and the demonic energy that I was stopping from reaching my head would finally reach my head and corrode my mind. I looked at the others, who were carefully looking through the quest paper. In short, we will all participate in the quest with the goal of making money and building a potential relationship with this so-called Duchess. Wait, why do we need to build a relationship with the Duchess? Jean asked, genuinely curious. Looking back at him, I asked, why wouldn't we? There was not a single rule that said that I needed to make enemies with all the demons here. After all, making friends was a lot less tiresome than making enemies. Chapter 699 Quest. The room was beautifully illuminated by a glittering chandelier placed in the middle of the ceiling. Click. The handle on the door to the room clicked as it was opened, and a moment later, a tall, graceful figure dressed in black clothing that were rather revealing entered the room, casting about. Priscilla Pertinol didn't look around as she quietly walked toward the far end of the room, where a large window stood. Arriving at the window by her side was a massive 10-foot-tall glass pane that was gently tilted toward the side of the wall. Reflected in the mirror was a graceful figure with long pink hair that reached the ends of her back, stopping right above her waistline. 2 thin horns protruded from the top of her forehead, separating her hair and leaving her unable to hide her pristine looks that seemed to make any man drool. Her face was carefully composed in an almost statuesque placidity, absent even of the slightest emotion as her red eyes gazed past through the window. How many people have decided to sign up for the task? In the moment that she opened her mouth, the area behind her warped, and a black figure appeared out of thin air, with one knee to the ground and a respectful expression. We've received several applicants so far. A rough estimate. About 100 or so. Priscilla's delicate brows furrowed ever so slightly, unable to disguise her annoyance. This little? Yes. It appears as though the other houses have put up similar quests. I see. Priscilla gave a curt nod, the hint of a frown on her lips indicating that she did not appreciate having her hand forced in this manner. Looks like they caught on to my intentions. It appears so. The servant answered, his head lowering and his voice becoming quieter. What do you plan on doing? Will you still proceed? Silence filled the room as Priscilla contemplated. Originally, she had anticipated having more than 1,000 different participants join her on this quest. It wasn't just about her fame and good looks that attracted people to join her mission. It was also the fact that the monetary reward was high. It was definitely high enough to attract the attention of the masses. Her goal was obviously not taming the abyssal mammoth, which, although difficult, wasn't impossible for her to beat. Her goal was to recruit as many talented people to her side in order to aid her with the incoming fruit harvesting event, World Decree, that would soon take place. But who would have thought that the other demons would see through her intentions and perform similar mass recruitment quests? It appears as though there is a spy within my faction. There was no change in Priscilla's facial features as she peered at her servant through the corners of her eyes. The servant, who was quietly kneeling on one knee, suddenly felt a powerful pressure bear down on his body for a split second before finding it disappear into thin air, and what followed was Priscilla's voice as she ordered, "Disappear from my sight." "Understood." With the fade of his words, his figure quietly melted into the background of the room, leaving Priscilla by herself. The rhythmic echo of Priscilla's heels reverberated throughout the room as she walked toward the chair of her desk and donned a fur-trimmed black cape. After hooking it around her shoulders and flapping it open with a light swing of her arm, the cape followed her as she walked toward the far end of the room, where she opened the large wooden door and then exited the building. "I'll have to make do with what I have for now." "Are you sure that they won't find us?" Jean inquired while carefully examining our surrounding environment, his eyes darting toward his right and left. Because of the way he was holding his hands at the edges of his hood, trying to pull it down as far as he could, he didn't look much different from someone who had completely lost their mind. It seems like the demonic energy has also started to affect him. "Ha." I sighed to myself, placing my hand over his shoulder and shook my head. "Don't worry. Look, we're not the only group wearing hoods. If you look carefully, apart from a few, most people here are also wearing hoods." There were a lot of people surrounding us as we stood in the middle of a large plaza. One look was enough to tell that the vast majority of them were demons, but a closer inspection revealed that there were also orcs and members of other races interspersed among them. Of course, I was only referring to the people I could see. As I was mentioning to Jean, there were quite a few other people who had the same plan as us and were concealing their identities by donning hoods that were very similar to the ones we were wearing. This made us stand out even less as we perfectly blended with the crowd. "You're right." Jean eventually became calmer after becoming aware of the other hooded figures that were surrounding us and, "Has everyone gathered?" A clear and distinct voice reverberated through the room, reaching the minds of each and every one of the people who were present. The voice wasn't particularly loud, but it effortlessly made its way into the heads of everyone present, and there was a slight alteration in the expression on my face as a result. What fine control of demonic energy! It was almost on the level of my control with Scions. A graceful figure materialized on the balcony of a white building that stood adjacent to the plaza, and with the tap of her heel, she drew the attention of those who were present. In the instant she appeared, the faces of many people present changed, unable to hide their infatuated gazes. "This is dangerous." The aura that was emanating from the demon was comparable to that of Suriel, an individual who had been close to achieving the rank of prince and was the same individual who had come close to defeating me some time ago. If the two of us fight, I might be able to win, but the price will definitely not be small. Just the fact that she wasn't even one of the strongest demons in this city made me aware of just how dangerous the place I was in was. My guard increased a notch as I took a small step back. At precisely the same time, I became aware of a second figure that was erecting itself behind her. He was also a demon, and he was dressed in what appeared to be heavy armor. He was standing behind her while maintaining a calm and emotionless expression. "Since you've all gathered here, you should all be aware of what I request of you." When Duchess Priscilla spoke, her words once more floated through my mind like the mellow tunes produced by a string instrument being plucked. "I won't go into heavy detail since all of you must already be aware of what I want to achieve. We will be departing in the next hour, so if you have any business that you wish to ask me about, do so now. I have no interest in waiting for those that are not prepared." For the next few minutes, the plaza fell into a state of silence as no one raised their hand to ask any questions. Seeing this, the Duchess shifted her gaze away from the people who were standing in the plaza, and then she turned back into the large mansion. As she did so, she gave the crowd one final glance. "Since nobody has anything to ask, I will go and get myself prepared." Her figure disappeared shortly after, and the plaza bustled with noise. Slowly closing my eyes, I softly mumbled, "Get ready. We're about to leave." The minutes ticked by in a flash, and precisely when an hour had passed, the Duchess materialized once more on the highest point of the balcony. This time around she was clad in a form-fitting slender-framed armor that accentuated her already well-developed curves and fit her body like a glove. Follow me along. I will not wait for those that can't keep up. Despite the little interactions I had with this Duchess, I sort of had an understanding of her. She was a noble-ship person. Someone who didn't like to repeat herself and wanted others to work efficiently. She kind of reminded me of Donna, but she was even more uptight than her. Ugh, the more I think about it, the more accurate I find this comparison to be. Despite the fact that it was far too soon to pass judgment, this was the conclusion that I reached based on the brief amount of time that I was able to see her. Although I did say that I wanted to befriend her, that's on the premise that she isn't one of the demons that would backstab me at any moment. I must gain a deeper understanding of her before deciding whether I should work with her or not. By then my mind was already made up and I followed her from behind. We exited the city and I followed closely behind her as we ran for what seemed like a couple of hours before we finally came to a stop in front of an enormous cave. We're here. She turned to face the others and drew a slim sword from her waist as she slowly fixed her gaze on the at least 100-meter-high cave that stood behind her. She then pointed it at the cave and coldly shouted, "Get ready, we will start immediately." Chapter 700 Quest 3. As soon as we stepped foot inside the cavern, we were met with an onslaught of hostile creatures from every direction. They were all ranked at approximately 8 rank, and they came charging at us in large numbers. The monsters ranged from large rodent-like creatures to large bats that screeched loudly, causing some people to cover their ears in order to protect them. Heek. There would be an occasional S-ranked beast, but they weren't anything threatening given our numbers. Claik. Claik. Ahoo. Ahool. The howls of the beasts that were killed by the mercenaries who had been hired by the Duchess who stood at the very front of the assault echoed through the air, along with the sound of metal clashing against hard objects. Sparks flew in the air and a rusty smell started to linger in the air. She's stronger than Suriel. At the moment my attention was directed toward the front, where the Duchess stood. Her movements were so fluid and graceful, and her sword cut through the monsters like they were made of butter, severing them into 2 halves each time it passed through one. If she hadn't been conserving her strength for the abyss mammoth, none of the monsters would have made it to us, as she easily could have gotten rid of all of them on her own. Shoo. Shoo. Amanda's arrows ripped through the bodies of the monsters in the distance in a matter of seconds, slicing through the air as if they were bullets and at the same time remaining silent. She was like a silent reaper, reaping through the lives of the monsters without making the slightest of sounds. If there were a competition to determine who had the highest kill count, the winner would most likely be Amanda, as she was able to kill a monster every half a second on average. Wherever her arrows went, a monster would die. Even though many people were reserving their strength for the abyssal mammoth, her performance was still noteworthy as it drew the attention of the Duchess, which was what we had intended from the very beginning. "Are you not going to make your move?" I turned my head to look at Jean, who was keeping a low profile as he walked alongside me. After a couple of seconds of silence, during which he continued to keep his attention fixed on the monsters in front of him, he murmured something to himself under his breath. "Annoying. WH." Before I could even finish my sentence, dozens of different monsters were impaled by spikes that rose from the ground. PFDD. Blood splattered and the beasts fell to the ground lifeless. I blinked a couple of times in order to make sure that I was seeing right. I wasn't the only one surprised by Jin's power, as I noticed the Duchess casting a glance our way. Her expression didn't change, but it was clear that we had now been locked into her sights. That aside, I really need to find a way to clear their minds. It feels like everyone has suddenly entered their period. Somehow, unlike them, I was able to withstand the side effects of the demonic energy due to my strength. But even so, it was just barely enough, and hence why I was forced to come here. However, in the case of the others, they were truly reacting badly to the demonic energy. I don't even think I remember Amanda ever being this quiet. She never was this quiet, even when we were in the lock. And the fact that she has barely spoken to me at all over the past few days was something that I found to be quite unsettling. Pooey. Spurt. There's a lot more of these pests than I thought. Priscilla mumbled to herself as she slashed her small sword through the air, easily cutting through one of the monsters that lunged at her from beneath the ground. Falling to the ground with a light thud, she turned around where a burly demon wearing a large metallic armor stood. Uncle, how far are we from the abyssal mammoth? We shouldn't be too far, Duchess. The burly demon answered, his voice curt and somewhat distant. Amichum. The Duchess, who was already accustomed to her uncle's demeanor, refrained from making any further comments and instead turned her attention back to the candidates who were eliminating the monsters that she let pass through. She turned her attention once more toward the demon, whom she addressed as Uncle. Have you found anyone interesting? A couple. He responded while casting a fleeting glance toward a few of the mercenaries who were fighting behind them. To this point, their abilities are adequate at best. Even though it won't be enough by the time we face the abyssal mammoth, their accomplishments aren't without praiseworthiness. In order for me to come to an accurate conclusion regarding their performance, I will need to see how they perform later along the lines. I understand. Priscilla gave her uncle's assessment of the hired mercenaries a tacit approval by giving him a knowing nod. With the actions of the other houses, it was no longer a secret that she was trying to use this opportunity to rope some demons toward her side. Everyone who was present at the time believed that she was using the abyssal mammoth as a means by which to test their qualifications, which, while not entirely accurate, did have some truthful aspects to it. However, because of this, Priscilla knew that some of the mercenaries were still holding back some of their strength. This was the reason why she hasn't focused too much of her attention on the mercenaries up until this point. Of course, the way some performed still inevitably captured her attention, and not just hers. Priscilla was able to see that some of the demons were also focusing their attention on them. However, the demons' attention did not contain the least bit of goodwill. When she realized this, she turned around to head deeper into the cave, a faint smile spreading across her face. I wonder how they'll handle this. In order for them to join her faction, they had to demonstrate, at the very least, the ability to deal with a couple of jealous demons. Priscilla was curious to see who exactly could show her a good show. Hey guys, I think I'd be best if we calmed down for a bit. Although I was never against standing out, there's a limit. We're standing out way too much. In a figurative sense, Jean and Amanda were like weapons of mass slaughter, as they were able to kill dozens of demons with every one of their movements. Their performance was so good that it attracted the attention of most of the demons present. They weren't much at first, but they were starting to become quite burdensome by now. So what if we attract attention? Melissa muttered something under her breath as she watched Jean and Amanda wreak havoc on the lives of the many monsters that were coming their way. Stop being a pussy. If some jealous demon comes, just slap him up a bit and let them know their place. Shouldn't you be capable of at least this much? They continued to attack the monsters with bloodthirsty expressions on their faces, completely ignoring my words, which led me to believe that not a single one of them understood the objectives I was trying to accomplish. Oh God, this is worse than I thought. It became painfully obvious to me that the demonic energy was quickly eroding their minds, and my heart jumped a little. I knew that they were still safe for now, but what about in 5 months? Will they retain any semblance of rationality at all by then, or will it be too late? I need to find the solution quickly. I had severely underestimated the density of the demonic energy on this planet. You know what? Go crazy. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. I waved my hand, sighing. As long as I manage to strike a deal with the Duchess, standing out might not be too bad. I just hope the other houses won't start trying to recruit us. That's where things would truly become troublesome. To my relief, the events did not play out in the manner in which I had originally anticipated them to, as there was no demon that appeared to cause us any trouble for us. It may have been because of the strength that we displayed, or it may have been because they were trying to save their strength in order to fight the abyssal mammoth, but regardless of the reason, it definitely worked in our favor. 5 hours into the raid, after making a sharp turn, we found ourselves suddenly exposed to a tall opening, which was accompanied by the echoing sound of water splashing. Instantaneously, everyone came to a complete stop and took a cautious look in the direction of where the sound came from, where they could just about make out the silhouette of a large creature lounging in what appeared to be a small lake. Follow me quietly. Following the Duchess's instructions, everyone moved stealthily from behind, and it was at that precise moment that everyone was able to get a look at the enormous creature. A massive shadow was cast over the area where we were standing, and an oppressive energy permeated the air, making it difficult to breathe. The shadow was cast by something that towered over at least half the height of the top end of the cave, which was no shorter than a skyscraper. In order to get a good look at the creature given its sheer size, I had to crane my neck all the way back in order to see it properly, and as if that weren't enough, rumble, rumble. My heart skipped a beat whenever it moved, as every single one of its movements caused the entire cavern to shake. This is definitely more than I signed up for. No, it actually was, and it was exactly because of this that I was starting to regret my decision. And what made things even worse was the sudden piercing sound of something splitting through the air as a silver object streaked through the air, impaling itself deeply into the creature's eyes. Everyone froze, and the expression on my face completely hardened, and I robotically turned my head to look beside me, where Amanda was standing with a satisfied smile on her face. Good. Chapter 701 Abyssal Mammoth. Whew. The abyssal mammoth raised its tusk into the air and let out a ferocious cry, much like the way a trumpet would sound. Simultaneously, its body raised up on its two legs, exposing its fluffy underbelly in the process, with its legs smashing down against the ground when coming down. Rumble, rumble. The cave began to shake as a result of the mammoth's violent movements, and the color of the mammoth's eyes shifted to an ominous crimson hue. Not good, it's agitated. The cave will collapse at this rate. Confronted with an unexpected circumstance, the demons began to panic a little. However, the panic didn't last too long. After all, they were all seasoned veterans. It didn't take long before the order was restored, and immediately after, every demon began forming formations and barking orders at each other. Aim for the underbelly. That's its weak point. Make sure you don't kill it. Coming. Boomy. Boomy. The cave began to shake once more, and the combatants on both sides, the mammoth and the demons, engaged in a struggle with one another. This is worse than I anticipated. As I turned my head to look at Amanda, I heaved a sigh of exasperation and gazed at her with a frown. It wasn't just her. Everybody else was affected by it as well. They were getting to the point where they were a real pain to deal with. But I couldn't really blame them, to be honest. It was my choice to bring them along, and I was aware from the very beginning that the more mana or demonic energy they used, the more their minds became corrupted by the demonic energy. It was also the reason why I avoided using my powers as much as possible. Really, if there was anyone to blame, it was me. Shoei. Zua. Hoo-hoo. Amanda's arrows tore through the air as she continued to shoot in the direction of the mammoth. They rode through the air like silver bullets, arriving at the beast in a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, when they collided with the mammoth's hide this time, unlike her first attempt, the arrows were deflected away and sent careening aimlessly toward the ground. I wasn't surprised by this. After all, there was a significant gap in the level of strength that existed between the mammoth and Amanda. The simple fact that she had been successful in obtaining a hit in the first place was mind-boggling in itself. Of course, it would have never occurred if it had not been caught off guard. But that was the whole point. Are you not going to make a move? Melissa asked, observing the battlefield from beside me. From the looks of things, it will take quite a while for them to get rid of the beast. If you were to help out, I'd help save some time. I guess. I nodded, agreeing with her statement. Still, I didn't move from my position and continued to observe from the back. My eyes currently focused on the Duchess. But you could make the same argument for the Duchess. If she were to make a move, things would turn for the better. After all, she's as strong as the normal me. I chose to omit the last part. Plank. Whew. Sparks flew into the air as weapons and claws struck against the hard fur of the mammoth, which further enraged it and caused it to trash around with more ferocity. The cave began to shake even more violently, and the stalactites that hung above the ceiling of the cave began to fall like sharp projectiles toward the ground beneath. The icicle-shaped formations, which, given the dense nature of the rock that was used to construct the cave, held an incredible amount of weight, came hurtling down toward a series of demons, impaling their bodies from above. Arg. Watch out. The sight was not a pretty one as dark blood spattered all over the cavern, and the demons didn't even get a chance to scream before getting impaled. With some luck, some managed to survive due to the fact that their cores were not damaged, but those were in the minority. Simply put, the sheer size of the stalactites made sure that no demons survived, smashing their cores alongside their bodies. How many demons have fallen so far? Priscilla asked, overlooking the entire battlefield from a safe corner of the battlefield. Her gaze continued to linger over the mammoth as her glare became colder with each passing second. So far we've lost about 10 marquee-ranked demons with several already heavily injured. Her uncle replied, seemingly prepared for the question beforehand. 10 already? A frown appeared on Priscilla's pristine features as her brows momentarily moved up. This was more than she had anticipated. If I may add. Her uncle spoke, his voice brimming with caution. I believe that the reason for the losses is due to none other than the premature shot that was made at the very beginning. Had it not been for... Enough. Priscilla cut, her expression remaining the same. The same couldn't be said for her voice as a bone-chilling coldness accompanied her next words. Don't forget our objective. We're not here to coddle them into defeating the beast. We're here to test them. If it were up to me, I'd have killed the beast a while back. I don't need them to be here. It might have been troublesome, but the beast was truly nothing for her to be wary of. Sure, if she were alone, it'd prove to be an annoying foe for her. But she wasn't alone, was she? Her answer was enough to appease her uncle for a brief moment. Only a brief moment as he once again opened his mouth. Yes, I know, but... Did the shot miss? Priscilla cut her uncle again. This time, her gaze focused on the hooded figure that had shot the mammoth in the eye. The Duchess has made it a point to keep a close eye on the individual ever since they engaged the mammoth with their shot. It wasn't out of spite or annoyance. It was more out of interest. Priscilla preferred courageous people to cowards. The hooded's figure style was to her liking. Of course, although she liked courageous soldiers, it didn't mean she liked reckless ones. Had the individual missed, it would have been a whole different story. Since they didn't miss their shot, they did nothing wrong. For those who died, they were merely not good enough. At their level, a soldier had to adapt to any situation that was presented to them. With one eye lost, they had gained a good advantage. It was now up to them to exploit that advantage and seal the deal. Aim for its right side. At its belly. That's its weak point. It was a loud shout coming from the distance that once again caught Priscilla's attention as she slowly turned her head. Another hooded figure? It came as a surprise to her when she noticed that the person who had yelled was donning a black hood, the same kind of hood as the one that belonged to the person who had fired the first shot. It was obvious that the voice belonged to a woman based on how clear it was, and the instructions that she was giving seemed to be directed toward another hooded figure who had managed to get on the right side of the beast in some miraculous way. Attack its right side, you fuckwit. That's where the mammoth's blind side is. Her words were rather harsh too. Priscilla watched as the figure leisurely approached the beast, walked up to it, and then made its way underneath it in the most relaxed way possible. Perhaps it was due to the chaos or the figure's skills or perhaps both, but much to her surprise he stood right beneath the mammoth's belly and, with a straightforward but magnificent thrust of their dagger, they slashed directly at the beast's belly, creating a deep gash from which thick red blood gushed out. It might have been just her imagination, but for a split second, everything came to a sudden stop. What? Priscilla watched as the battlefield came to a sudden stop as both sides tried to process what had just happened. Hoo-hoo. It was the loud and agonized wail of the beast that woke everyone up from their stupor as blood began to pour out of the deep gash that had formed under its belly, dyeing the floor in red. It may not have been a crippling injury, but the injury was undoubtedly excruciating, especially as the savagery of the beast increased and the cave started to shake with such intensity that one might think that it was going to collapse at any minute. Rumble. Rumble. No, it was definitely going to collapse at this rate, and Priscilla's right brow raised at the realization. Not good. If the cave collapses, it will be quite troublesome. Duchess, isn't it about time that we interfere? The situation is not good right now. If the cave collapses, we'll risk losing everyone. It wasn't just her. Her uncle came to the same conclusion as he expressed his concerns about the current situation, which wasn't good. Let alone the demons that were currently fighting the beast. Even we would have trouble coming out unscathed if the cave were to collapse. Her uncle continued, his expression hardening by the second. No, not yet. Priscilla shook her head, remaining in the same spot she was in. Her gaze, however, was currently drawn toward a specific area. Toward a specific hooded group, or, to be precise, an individual. For some strange reason, Priscilla felt something weird about him. She couldn't quite explain it, but it made her spine tingle. At the moment, she couldn't care less about the situation around her as her gaze was firmly stuck in the Hod's figure direction. I can't sense anything. The more her gaze lingered in their direction, the more she was surprised to realize that she couldn't sense anything from them. Baffled her. She could count on one hand the people that could hide their presence from her. Typically, and in most cases, it was because whoever she was observing had some great skill that made it hard to see how much demonic energy was entering their bodies. However, in some other cases, rare cases, it was because of another reason. An obvious yet undesirable one. It can't be that, can it? It was with the sudden sharpening of her gaze that she noticed that the hooded figure had turned its head to meet hers. Priscilla did not flinch when their gazes met, and although the hooded figure's concealed features prevented her from seeing their face, she was still able to make out two striking deep blue eyes that seemed to see through her very. Now, if she didn't as much as flinch before, she did so now as her arms uncrossed and her mouth parted open. It shouldn't be. Chapter 702 Abyssal Mammoth. We've got her full attention. From afar I was being viciously glared at by a certain someone. Or at least, that was how it felt as I turned my head away from the Duchess and inwardly cursed to myself. I knew it. Considering what the others were doing, it was inevitable that it would happen, but why is she staring at me? What did I even do to prompt her attention? I didn't even act once. I didn't do anything special. I just sat still and watched the others go about their business. There was nothing I did that would make her pay attention to me instead of the other things going on around us. Is it perhaps my charm? That did sound rather probable, but it had to be noted that I was currently wearing a hood, making this possibility invalid for the time being. Well, whatever. I shrugged my shoulders. My interest only lasted until that point, at which point I turned my attention back to the enormous beast off in the distance. More than anything, I'm surprised by Jin's skills. It was surprising that he was able to sneak under the mammoth without being spotted. The gap between the two parties was wide, and for him to somehow be able to sneak right under it and deal some damage was nothing to make light of. I suppose that in exchange for their sanity, they were able to acquire a nice boost in their abilities. It was the only plausible explanation for the current situation. The mammoth and the demons were locked in a fierce struggle, their bodies tangled together as they fought for dominance. Sparks flew and the cave echoed with the sounds of their roars and snarls. The air was thick with the scent of blood. Demons tore at the mammoth with their claws and teeth, looking for a vulnerable spot in its thick hide to exploit. In retaliation, the mammoth delivered a devastating blow with its trunk and tusks, which sent the demons flying across the cavern. Rumble, rumble. The battle raged on with neither side willing to give up. The demons were driven by their desire for destruction, while the mammoth fought desperately to rid itself of the little flies that were invading its domain. As the battle raged on, it seemed as though the outcome was certain. With Jean and Amanda's help in injuring the beast, everything pointed to the demon's side, but slowly but surely the mammoth's superior strength began to show in the desperate situation. Swoosh. The mammoth strikes were becoming more powerful by the second, wearing down the majority of the demons, and with a raging sound, the trunk of the mammoth began flailing around with more force. One by one the demons fell. This went on until only a handful remained. Whack. Help. A demon who had crashed nearby extended its hand toward me, begging for help. Staring at the demon, I flicked my finger and their figure turned into dust. This has turned rather problematic. Although I had somewhat expected this outcome, it still surprised me to see just how powerful the mammoth was. Slowly, I turned my head and focused my eyes on the Duchess, whose pretty face was contorted as she gazed at the faraway beast with an unusually solemn expression. And you're telling me that she wants to tame this beast? For the love of God, was she out of her mind? How in the world was she supposed to tame that monster? And here I thought Melissa was the only seer dash. Oi. My face scrunched up at the sudden pain that I felt on the side of my abdomen. When I turned my head, I was met with Melissa's glare. What was that for? I just felt like you were insulting me. My heart froze. Was she some sort of esper? So you poked me because you felt like I insulted you? No. Melissa shook her head and turned to observe the conflict in the distance. I did it because you said it out loud. I did. Well, that was unexpected. Was I so engrossed in my own thoughts that I accidentally spoke out loud? Were the whispers that I constantly heard throughout the day finally getting to me? I felt relieved hearing her answer. So long as she wasn't an esper. Damn, for a moment I thought you were an Esper. So you really were speaking badly about me. My entire body tensed up, and Melissa's head turned away from the battlefield. The way her head turned caused mine to do the same thing, and as our eyes met, neither one of us spoke for a good minute. Oh fuck. I've seen enough. Priscilla took her eyes away from the mammoth in the distance. Her primary objective was to observe the people in the cave and determine whether or not any of them would make good candidates for her faction. Despite the fact that the vast majority of the demons that were there were rather underwhelming, she did observe a few that showed promise. In particular, a specific hooded group. Out of all the individuals present, they were the ones that captured her attention the most. Appearing behind her was her uncle. Would you like for me to take action? No, I can handle this myself. Dismissing her uncle, Priscilla took a step forward, and her entire body started to glow with a pink hue. After that, an armor began to form around her body, perfectly adhering to her body and highlighting every inch of it as it did so. As her pink hair moved behind her head in a fluttering motion, a silver rapier materialized on her left hand. She grasped it tightly. Priscilla's figure became blurry as she continued to stare at the battlefield, which was becoming more bloody by the second. She then appeared directly above the mammoth. Her movements were so quick that even the mammoth had trouble keeping up with them. A beautiful silver curve arced through the air and then sank straight into the mammoth's hide. Blood splattered in the air, and the mammoth let out an anguished wail. A woo. Rumble. Rumble. The trashing intensified and the cave shook even more violently. As several stalactites fell from above and collided with the demons below, more demons died. It was unnecessary to describe the resulting damage. He help. The mammoth paid no attention to the events taking place around it. Instead, it was completely fixated on Priscilla, who was looking down at it from above. Her red eyes were emotionless and unmoving. As they stood face to face, neither of the two behemoths made a sound. Quietly, the two observed one another. The only sound that could be heard was the agonized cries of the demons. Then, as if in sync with each other, the mammoth raised both of its tusks in the air and Priscilla's figure blurred. She materialized immediately next to the mammoth and thrust her rapier in its direction, targeting the eyes of the beast with pinpoint accuracy. Her actions were lightning fast and coldly calculated, directing one's attack squarely at an area that had already been damaged. As long as her rapier smashed through the eye, the fight would effectively be over. Of course, things weren't as simple as thrusting into the beast's eye. It wasn't a Duke-ranked beast for no reason. At the precise moment when Priscilla's rapier was about to make contact with one of the beast's eyes, the animal suddenly thrust its tusks in Priscilla's direction with a swift movement of its neck. The action took place at such a breakneck speed that the only thing that onlookers were able to make out was a figure hurtling through the cavern at an incredible rate of speed. Crash. Walk. Priscilla groaned as she was flung against the cavern wall. When she collided with the wall, her pink hair fell onto her face, concealing her attractive features. Her crimson eyes glowed with a menacing red gleam as she glared at the mammoth on the opposite end, who was faring much worse than she. Its trunk dangled as fresh blood poured from a large open wound on its upper surface. The mammoth wailed mournfully, showcasing just how much pain it was going through. Steadily taking a step forward, Priscilla smoothed out her hair before shifting her attention back to the mammoth a fair distance away from her. Had this one not wanted to keep you as a pet, you would have been devoured by me already. She scowled. Her hostile tone conveyed unfathomable murderous intent. Injecting demonic energy into her rapier, a pink glow formed, gently coating the blade of the rapier. Taking a step forward, she eyed the beast in the distance and slashed. The cut was rather straightforward. It appeared unimpressive to those around her. Those with keen eyes, however, thought otherwise. Several couldn't even help but take a step back due to the terror that they'd witnessed in that one simple slash. But more than anyone, the one individual that felt the terror of that slash the most was none other than the mammoth, who could only stare blankly at the attack that approached its direction. The only thing it could do was stare. Stare at what seemed to be the end. Spurta. Blood splattered everywhere across the rugged ground, dyeing the rocks in a crimson shade. Thump. The ground shook and the mammoth fell to the ground. Silence returned to the cave as everyone's focus was on Priscilla, who slowly sheathed her rapier. Ignoring the stares and with her gaze still lingering over the mammoth, she calmly fixed her hair and made her way toward the beast. "Thank the heavens that I'm in a good mood," Priscilla murmured. She soon approached the mammoth on the ground, which was seemingly on its dying breath. Wang. Huh. It happened all too suddenly. Just as she was about to get near the beast, something tore through the air at unimaginable speeds. It was so fast that she didn't even have time to realize what was happening. In that brief moment, however, her eyes caught a glimpse of something sharp making its way toward the upper parts of her brows. An ambush. The realization came a tad too late. She realized that by the time she'd managed to get her rapier out, it would already be too late. The speed at which the attack was coming wasn't something that any regular marquee-ranked demon could handle. "It's too late," she thought, clenching her teeth and preparing to concentrate her demonic energy toward her core. She had several life-preserving means. Ok. Bam. Unexpectedly, just as she was about to shift her concentration to her core, she felt a massive force hit her in the head and her body was propelled backward. At the same time, she witnessed the sight of a silver streak pass through the area she'd previously been in. Her eyes widened, and it was then that she saw what seemed to be a black spike standing in the area she had been in. It was all torn up, but she knew that it was what had saved her.